2 or 3 admins who are here to give us the inside scoop. My name is Sasha, and I'm the content manager here at Upswing, and I'll be your moderator throughout the next couple questions. So to start, I'm sure you're interested in who will be speaking today. I'd love to introduce our panelists. The first is Teresa Garcia, who's the Director for Centers of Learning Excellence at South Texas College. Teresa, would you mind saying a little bit more about yourself?
Hello, Sasha, and I'm excited to be speaking to all of our Upswing just colleagues. I've been with a community college. It's going a little over 2 years, and a lot of my experiences have been also at the university. I've been with writing centers since that was my very first work study job back in before you were born, Sasha, back in the 80s. But I love writing centers. I love learning centers. To me, the dynamics of how you bring a team together to best serve students is always an interesting question to explore, and I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. We're excited to hear all of your wonderful insights. The next person our panelist is Jose Regalado. He's the Director of Learning Enrichment Center at Laredo College. Joe, would you just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself? It seems like he might be having some technical difficulties. So why don't we move forward with his coworker, Jesus Molina, who's the coordinator of student support services at Laredo College. What's up, Jesus?
Hello, can everybody hear me? Testing 1, 2.
Yep, we can hear you.
You can? Okay. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jesus Molina. I'm the language arts tutor coordinator here at Laredo Community College with student support services. And yeah, I've been in part of Laredo College for about 7 years now. Before that, I was a writing tutor at Texas A&M International University for about 5 years. So I'm going on 12, 13 years of tutoring and working with students, and it's been a blast. I really enjoyed it. Thank you all for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're so excited to hear your insights as well, Jesus. So without further ado, let's move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. Attendees, if you have questions during this portion or any feedback, please don't hesitate to leave it in the chat window on the lower right corner. There will also be a short question and answer session towards the end of the webinar, so feel free to put any questions you have in the chat window and we'll get to them closer to the end. So first question we have today is understanding the context of HSIs. Terry and Jesus, what unique challenge do HSIs face?
Terry, after you.
Oh, okay. I know that the challenge that we always face is connecting with students in a way that's meaningful to them. For many of our students, our first generation, of course, the fact that we're a Hispanic-serving institution, there's a lot of diversity in there in terms of the college experiences our students bring. We have students who have parents that are faculty members. We have the first generation. We have students that are more comfortable in Spanish versus English or in English versus Spanish. And so finding a way to connect meaningfully where you don't want it to be cookie cutter, that's one of the ways I know we rely on our, on our resources like Upswing. So those connections are what need to stay unique. And it's sometimes challenging to keep that fresh. And so we really rely on the innovation here at South Texas College.
Wow, that is such a incredible insight because I think people tend to take HSIs at face value as being like one level of diversity, and really it is just the umbrella. It's just the tip of the iceberg as far as the different populations of students. Jesus, what do you think?
Yeah, I do agree. Making some type of a meaningful connection. In my experience, at least, it's part of that is with the parents. That it's a Hispanic community, um, primarily Spanish speaking, so they don't speak a lot of English. First generation, so parents didn't even attend college. So I find that a lot of our students are coming in very much confused as to what to do, what's the next step, where do I go from here, and they can't even turn to their parents at home because the parents don't even have experience in that area. So the parents don't even know how to orient them. They don't even know how to orient them towards the services that we have here, where we could orient them, but it's just I guess that initial engagement, finding a way to get them, get this information to students and their parents.
Yeah, we see that a lot here at Upswing is making sure that resources are made accessible and available to first generation students. So the big key points that I got from this question was the first takeaway from Terry is that creating those meaningful connections, being able to relate to all these different diverse types of students, and then from Jesus, being able to really cater to first generation students and make sure that resources are accessible, because they might not have people who they can rely on for these types of answers. So let's move on to the next question. Starting with Terry, how do HSI students view tech in their everyday lives? I know that you already alluded to innovation, so can you tell me a little bit more about that?
One of the challenges we're exploring and kind of working with is students that sometimes don't have access to the high quality internet access. A lot of our students are relying on phones. So I know whenever we can make our options mobile friendly, I know that's been very helpful. The other issue we've seen, or just area where we're meeting students' needs, is with how to use these resources academically. Many times the social networking is very strong, but the academic use, again, we see it's not a monolithic kind of population. We see some that are very savvy in terms of using laptops, applications in a way that makes sense with their classroom and how they're being assessed in it. But then we'll often see students that'll say, I've gotten this bundle of textbooks and software and glossaries and dictionaries at the bookstore, and I don't know how to use any of them. So I think looking at the technology, not only in terms of, what kind of access do they have, for example, even something like a learning management system like Blackboard and Upswing, they look different on different phones. And so just getting students comfortable with that is something that we're always aiming for when we're working and interacting with students. And again, the idea that it's not monolithic. While there's many of my students are the ones teaching me how to use the technology. So I think being open to that is also really important too.
Okay, thank you for sharing your perspective. I definitely see where you're coming from loans because they're always in students' pockets or in student hands. So it really seems like the most effective way to reach out to students. Uh, Jesus, I'd love to hear from you, your perspective on this question. How do HSI students view tech in their everyday lives?
I agree with Terry that it's the more mobile friendly everything is because every time there's something new that's introduced to students, one of the first things I hear is, okay, is there an app? what's the app for this? It's all apps, apps, apps. So I think definitely going towards that. And you mentioned the social media aspect. I have found that I think with our higher excelling students, that they've really taken advantage of social media to help them with their studies, either setting up study groups or sharing notes with each other through social media, getting together to help each other with homework. And I think if we could find a way to sort of pass on those abilities, or at least that knowledge to do that to some of our more at-risk students, that would definitely benefit them, because it really is just the future of people just get together now in chat groups, and they do their homework that way, their study sessions that way. And I think the more we can take advantage of this and help some of our at-risk students to accommodate to this, I think would be very beneficial to them.
Okay, so your suggestion is applying these types of social media technologies to an academic setting so that students feel comfortable with each other, they feel getting help and assistance?
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. So the next question, I know that both of you are clearly innovators in this space, so I'm really curious to know, what is a best practice or policy that you would recommend to other HSIs? Feel free to share just one or a couple if you're so compelled.
One thing that I do is you want to get them as early as possible. You want to get these resources out to them during orientations, like even before they've had their first class day. We can get them, at least make them aware of these services, everything that we offer them. The sooner we get them used to using these resources, the better off they're going to be in the long term.
Okay, so getting in there early, making sure that you're at orientation or at transfer programs and things like that has been effective.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've even gone into the classrooms to do orientations for the students right then and there, focusing on either our services as a learning center or the Upswing services as well. So if they can put a face to these resources, I think they're more comfortable with going to ask for help, or at least having a face that they're like, I can turn to this person and I can ask them for help.
Okay, yeah. Uh, Terry, what is a practice or policy that you would recommend to other HSIs?
One of the practices I would recommend is working with, I know that one of our great advocates, I think, at any HSI program and institution is our faculty. So many times they can offer us strategies that will help students be more effective in their discipline. For example, this week, one of our coordinators was reaching out to our associate degree nursing faculty. And a strategy that I think many of our students weren't really implementing is the idea of reading completely before class. And that was impacting them with some of their test taking. So for example, when you were able to get the chapter reading done before class, you are then able to focus questions in class on content that maybe isn't exactly like in the book. So for example, if an instructor uses an example, or maybe they're looking at drug classes and there's a particular drug class that wasn't mentioned in the book, the student is able to ask that question in class when it's very meaningful and it's very fresh. And I think for many of our students, they were more like reading along with the class as opposed to reading before the class. And that was a strategy that our faculty was able to stress to us. And now that's something that we can strategize when we work with students in that program, because it is kind of a different way of thinking. It's often a recommendation reading before the class, but in this case, because there's so much material that's being covered, they often in a 3-hour class cover 13 to 14 chapters of material. If they haven't read, there's going to be gaps that they're not aware of, and when they become aware of those gaps in learning, the good thing is they'll have something like Upswing, but they may not always have access to the tutors and the faculty. And so that's really something that I think is a good practice, you know, periodically, whether it's through surveys, focus groups, or just an email, you know, can you tell me what's going really well or what you're observing? And is it something that we can implement in our institution, either through, we do academic coaching, we do tutoring, maybe it's something that we can develop a handout about on for independent study. So that's really something that I think we kind of think about our faculty, but it's hard to keep the students in our in our sites and at the same time keep the faculty member. And I think that's something where that coordination can really benefit our students, especially if we're dealing with first generation Hispanic-serving institutions. And as was mentioned, we sometimes we don't really realize how few resources are available once the student goes home.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Definitely closing the loop between faculty, students, and support coordination. I can see that that would be like a win-win-win scenario. Thank you. So the next question is, how is Upswing being used at your HS? Have you seen results from it, and how do students react to it? I can start with Jesus this time because he went last time.
Um, Definitely the bulk of the Upswing usage right now is definitely been for Upswing. It's essay submission. That's definitely what's being used the most. I know our English instructors really like that. They really like that students can submit an essay and they get it back with comments highlighting strengths and weaknesses and any other type of feedback, and they're able to use that to sort of gauge whether the student is learning from that feedback, how they're implementing the suggestions into their own writing. So that's definitely how it's being used the most here.
That's so awesome to hear. And I think it goes back a little bit to what Terry was saying as well, about helping students be really prepared for their assignments, and making sure that we're closing the gap not only between faculty and support services, gaps of information that students might be missing out on. So Terry asked you the same question. How is Upswing being used at your HSI?
At our HSI, we're really seeing a lot of students use it for like late night kind of weekend kind of hours. I know Sunday is a big day for us. We're not open at our centers, but I see students using the chat feature is super helpful to them, because that seems to work even if they're, regardless whether they're at a computer, if they're at their laptop, or they're at their phones. So that seems to be a way to get answers to questions that they didn't realize they had until maybe right before the class or right before the academic week begins. So I know it's really helpful to have, the variety of tutors. Some of them use the appointments, but I think a lot of them enjoy just going in and kind of waiting in queue for the next available tutor. So that ability to get instant help is, I know it's very beneficial to our students.
Wonderful. Yeah, making sure students have all of the possible options right at their fingertips, right? So that concludes the formal Q&A portion of the webinar. I want to extend thanks to both Terry and Jesus. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It is really valuable to have people with so much experience working at HSIs and working with student success giving us this type of feedback. So it doesn't look like there is any questions left in the chat feature. We can give it just a couple minutes if that's okay and see if any of the attendees put questions into the chat box. For now, however, I would like to say thank you also to our attendees and to let you know that you can reach out to us anytime if you have questions, say, after this event. Feel free to email us at info@upswing.io at any time. Okay, so thank you so much, and put any remaining questions in the chat box so we can answer them. Thank you again, Terry and Jesus.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank you for having us.
you.